Alright, response video to Matt on a couple of different issues. He just keeps at it. So, at least thanks, Matt, for replying videos. I mean, it's nice to get them anyway. You know, gives something to argue about. Have somebody to argue with is good. Alright, first, on the membrane versus DNA molecule. Which one came first? Okay, the membrane or the molecule? The nucleus or the cellular confined parts? I think it's really an academic question. I mean, I don't know if it really means anything, does it? It's kind of like saying, well, what's more important, the axle or the wheel? I mean, you know, I don't know if it's a critical distinction. So I would speculate, though, that I would still argue that I think the DNA molecule came first. I think we have to think in terms of the idea of the reproducing part. And the machinery really isn't good at, a machine isn't necessarily good at reproducing itself if it doesn't have the blueprint. Obviously, if it's a simple enough reproduction, I suppose it's theoretically possible. But there's really no indication, you know, that there's any cells that reproduce even without their nucleuses or something. I mean, it really doesn't happen. So we got to think too, I think you just kind of forget that, you know, whatever started, whatever the first reproducing cell was that had a DNA molecule that was the focus of the reproductive process, you know, it was a really primitive cell. I mean, it's a long time ago in a completely different world, so to speak, okay? A world that doesn't exist anymore, an environment that doesn't exist anymore, and there didn't have to be much to it. I mean, you're just, you know, the machinery of the reproducing, I mean, you could theoretically think that, okay, well, maybe the molecule could do it on its own occasionally, you know, in rare circumstances, just because of the construction of it. I mean, obviously there's a point in cellular reproduction where the DNA molecules are cloned. So that cloning process is really the key to the whole thing. So maybe that can happen in a very limited and, you know, structurally crude environment, just because of the structure of the molecule. It just tends to create a copy of itself because it ends up attaching to itself a duplicate molecule ends up just magnetically attaching to itself through atomic forces, molecular forces, whatever you want to call it. And then it would shed, and you'd end up with these two molecules. And so you could figure on that process being realistically possible, and it would only be a matter of time that DNA molecule would have an instruction in it, a function that might lead it to do something more, to create other structures as part of the mechanism. But it could just be that the structure itself just dictates the creation of this member constituent, this axle to the wheel part. But like I said, I don't see really a distinction here. I don't see how this is important. I mean, we can sit around for 10,000 years and try to figure out exactly how the first molecule became reproductive, but I really don't think it's that important a question. I don't think it really has any relevance to any of these bigger issue subjects about who we are and what we are, and what created us and what it means to be here. So let's get on to the consciousness stuff. And the other one, though, you're still pushing the ideas that somehow organisms, through their own experience, are affecting their genetic code somehow, that somehow through their personal experience they're somehow affecting their eggs and sperm, and the next generation is somehow benefiting from that. And we know it works the other way around, that the mutation first happens in the DNA molecule, and that the only expression, the only communication that's taking place between me and my sperm is the fact that I might damage it by some behavior. I might create more mutations. I might create more irregularities in it through my behavior. But I'm not going to communicate any purposeful or meaningful corrections to my DNA through my behavior, through my personal experience. So I think that's just bogus. You have absolutely nothing, there's nothing is evidentiary wise to demonstrate that that's an effect that's actually exists in the biological world. So I say bullshit on that one. The last one, we'll hit consciousness again. You keep talking about like it's this, you know, event that we are just we are just made to somehow, like the spacesuit was out there, and we were just, you know, created or designed by the system to fit into the spacesuit, you know, and like that's somehow the way consciousness works, that matter is just seeking it, that it's just falling into the consciousness, that it's just waiting for us somehow. I think it's just another bogus argument. What meaningful consciousness we know comes through nerves, through sense organs, through functional parts that allow sensation and textural impressions of reality to be made inside of a nervous system. I mean, that's where it exists. It doesn't exist in you know, inanimate objects in any meaningful way. They have no contextual understanding or appreciation. They have no blackboard to draw the picture on. It doesn't make any sense to make this argument. And we can see the functional, like I say, the association, the connection between consciousness and a sentient organism, where, you know, something, this ability to feel, the ambiguity of that, and the fact that you would have a brain that could, now they could combine, instead of, like I said, I made the comparison between analog and digital, and I think it's a good comparison, because what consciousness gave an organism in terms of a capacity was it gave it a capacity to have this pressure, this idea of an intensity, and that those intensities could be mixed and compared, and different things could be done with them, because they weren't strictly a digital thing. They were an impression. They were, and then we could have another instrument, another part of the brain, or even the same part but just used functionally different, could react to that impression, and to that mixture, to that blending of impressions, to that mixture of senses. I mean, that's what we really are. We're a mixture of sense organs, and maybe that's part of the constituent of consciousness, but I don't think there's any mystery to it. It's an aberration. It's an effect we arrived at, but it wasn't sitting there waiting for us to arrive at it. We just happened to acquire that functionality, and that functionality happened to be conducive to our survival. And it seems perfectly logical that it would be, and I don't think the explanation needs to go any farther than that, and I don't think the evidence indicates that there's anything else to it. Okay, it is an aberration. It's a manifestation of our particular complexity, and it really doesn't have to be looked at as some sort of magic that exists in everything, and that somehow you know, we are achieving some destiny by acquiring that faculty. There's nothing built into the nature of nature that pushes things towards it. There's nothing that says it has to happen. There's no rule that makes it likely or probable. And as I've explained, especially with consciousness as elaborate as ours, where you have this capacity to acquire knowledge and wisdom, and to contemplate your own existence, this self-awareness thing, there's every probability that that's not conducive to survival, that it isn't a functionally useful level of intelligence. Nature doesn't need us to be any more intelligent than to exploit an environment. That's the DNA molecule. The bacteria really doesn't care about contemplating the universe. All it cares about is feeding and reproducing. And that's the world we were designed to live in. It's only through a bizarre circumstance that we acquired this knowledge, this capacity to hold a greater volume of information. And over 10,000 years, like I said, of hard work, we acquired it. And there's every danger that we might annihilate ourselves with that knowledge base, because we are still bacteria. We're bacteria with nuclear bombs in our hands. And that's the real danger here, is that we've got to step way beyond the bacterial organism that we are. We've got to step way beyond our DNA. We're not going to survive. We're not. There's no future for the human race. Because its nature is too toxic to the elegance and discipline that you need to function in a world where you have power. we're dangerous with power. Any bacteria would be dangerous with power because it doesn't have the ethics and the principles and the competence to navigate such a responsibility. And it's a responsibility, but human beings don't think of it. They think of it as an entitlement, a right. And that's the huge mistake we've made. So anyway, I just don't see the point in a lot of these angles you're pursuing. There's nothing here. There's nothing that's going to change the fundamental facts of what we understand about the crudeness of the universe that created us, the crude forces. There's no deliberate end achieved. That it's you know, and that's what you're tending towards. You're tending towards some sort of happily ever after mush-ola that really isn't there. It's not in the cards, and you haven't made the argument. So you can keep pointing to books and links and all this other crap, but it's, you know, it is just that crap. It's a lot of talk, a lot of fancy words, and no substance.